The work of Paul Claudel is very little known to contemporary readers of poetry. Most people may recall the reference to Claudel in Auden, when Auden said about time, "And will pardon Paul Claudel, pardon him for writing well." This was a reference to the very extreme conservative views that Claudel had. He was an arch-Catholic, he was an ultramontane Catholic, that is, he believed absolutely in the rule of the Pope. In the later years of his life, he wrote incredibly long commentaries on books of the Bible. He wrote his own credo, which strangely has been translated into English, and he wrote a number of plays which were performed in Paris, especially Le Soulier de Satin. However, for me, Claudel's greatest achievement was 5 grandes odes, 5 great odes. Unfortunately, these have been translated with all their richness and all their complexity by the English poet Edward Lucy Smith. To me, it is a great sadness that Lucy Smith, now in his 80s and a gay icon, never continued as a translator of French. Instead, he became a professional writer of art textbooks for the American college market. And I think this is a very great sadness, and this is not the only loss. Paul Auster, the American novelist, whose novels have never impressed me with anything, created a beautiful book, the Random House Book of Contemporary French Poetry, which was published, I think, in the 1960s, and you can still pick it up quite cheaply, which was very interesting. But going back to Lucy Smith translated the whole of the 5 grandes odes into English, and the truth is, with a reasonable reading knowledge of French, and even looking at the original French side by side with Lucy Smith's translation, which was published by, I think, Rapp and Whiting in the 1960s, Rapp and Carroll in the 1960s, it isn't always possible to see very easily how the structure of the French is translated into English because of the particular way Claudel wrote in a style called the verset, which is some kind of line splits, and it does not make it all that easy to translate. The first thing one notices about Claudel is the massive rhetoric of his vision. Rhetoric, like nostalgia, has had a very bad press in England and in America. Very much Claudel is in the tradition of the great French dramatists like Ronsard, and his writing is incredibly powerful and passionate. I'll read a small amount from the first ode to the Muses, which is about a sarcophagus discovered on the road to Ostia and is currently in the Louvre. The 9 Muses, and in the midst of them Terpsichore, Maenad, I recognise you. Sibyl, I recognise you. I expect no cup from your hand, nor even your breast convulsively held in your nails. Cumaean, in the whirlwind of gilded leaves. But this big flute in your fingers, with its many holes, shows well enough that you no longer need to link it to the breath which fills you and has just brought you to your feet, O Virgin. no contortions, nothing to disturb the lovely folds of your robe from the neck to the feet it conceals. But I know well enough what you mean, with your head turned away, your gaze rapt and withdrawn, your listening face alight with orchestral rejoicing. I think this is a magnificent translation by Lucy Smith, and I'll read that same portion now in the original French. Les 9 muses, et au milieu Terpsichore. Je te reconnais, Ménade, je te reconnais, Sibylle, je n'attends avec ta main point de coupe ou ton sein même, convulsivement dans tes ongles, qu'humaine dans le tourbillon des feuilles dorées. Mais cette grosse flûte, tout entrouée de bouche à tes doigts, indique assez que tu n'as pas besoin de la joindre au souffle qui t'emplit et qui vient de te mettre au vierge debout. Point de contorsion. Rien du cul ne dérange les beaux plis de ta robe jusqu'aux pieds qu'elle ne laisse point voir. Mais je sais assez ce que veut dire cette tête que se tourne vers le côté, cette mine enivrée et close, et ce visage qui écoute, tout fulgurant de la jubilation orchestrale. I cannot really imagine anyone writing in that way today, and if they did, there was no way they would ever be regarded as poets, and it is very, very sad because rhetoric, which was originally part of the Greek syllabus, which Aristotle, Plato, and the great originating philosophers of the West pushed forward. Perhaps to some extent Yeats wrote rhetorically, and I think certainly Yeats had a profound influence on me 50 years ago as a young poet. But as someone pointed out, Yeats is an exception from the rule. His absolute sense of visionary inspiration, the way he was able to write The Lake Isle of Innisfree. There is a recording of him, very cracked, on a gramophone record, reading, I will arise and go now, and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there, of clay and wattles made. And Yeats recalls the inspiration for this, very strangely, was seeing an advertisement in a shop in London where a fountain of water was supporting some small balls as if they were in the air, and this brought back to Yeats his memories of the Isle of Innisfree. And I would like to conclude by recommending, and these are very easy to get and very cheap, and everyone's forgotten about these. There's a marvellous series of 4 vintage penguins produced in the 50s and 60s, the Penguin Books of French Verse, and the 20th century, introduced and edited by Anthony Hartley, is an incredibly marvellous source for French poetry, and these are translations into prose on the same page. And you get a quite different selection. It doesn't take anything from, I think he takes one small section from the 5 great odes, but he quotes some other poems of Claudel. I don't think any poet has been so little translated. The French series of classical poets and classical modern poets does have Claudel's collected poems in, which I think is 1,000 pages, but virtually nothing of this has been translated. I'll read a little bit from the Cantique du Rhône, Canticle of the Rhone. and just a couple of lines. Later, qu'il est beau, le navire noir que le vent et cette brise même sur mon visage amènent tout droit en quelques instants du fond de la mer. How beautiful the black ship is, which the wind and this very breeze on my face brings in a few moments right from the depths of the sea, when it lets its yard fall and circles and lies on its side.